The problem is the planet, talking about governance. Why? Because we are in a system which is international. Everybody defends its national interest. Every negotiator has instructions to defend its interests, and nobody defends the planet. And if everybody, or each government was to defend the planet, perhaps in each government you would have somebody in charge of global affairs, which in some governments you did have, but most don't have that and don't care much about it, because the problem is the planet does not vote. Trees don't vote, whales don't vote, so of course the problem is our system doesn't help people to defend the planet. In talking about governance, we have a certain amount of governance, or starting governance. You have the scientists, and here you have the IPCC, you have Dr. Pashori. The problem with the scientists now, which are organizing, you have the environmental service and biological diversity scientific group, etc. The problem with the scientists is that they don't really know how to communicate well. It's not their job. And they have to be protected by the politicians because they are attacked. Dr. Pashori was attacked very disgustingly, and we need to have the politicians to defend the scientists. If we get to the political and environmental and economic governance of the world, we get to the United Nations. Don't wait for the United Nations to make a decision for you. It won't. The United Nations in New York is a forum where 193 countries discuss, and the boss of the United Nations is a secrétaire. He's not a president, okay? He's there to help the 193 countries to make up of the decisions. The only decision-making binding which you have in the United Nations is the Security Council, and it takes some time, a long time, for the countries to agree in the Security Council. Otherwise, you have conventions. And Ambassador Dasgupta was talking about the 92 Framework Convention. It took only 1.5 years to negotiate this convention, because at that time people thought it was easy. And so we've got these conventions, these international conferences, which follow every 10 or 20 years. The 92 Rio was very, very spectacular, because you had the Agenda 21, you had these 3 conventions, but 20 years after, we see that it's not implemented. So Rio plus 20, and by the way, Rio plus 20, as was said, we tried to get all the people by the internet to contribute, to give recommendations. It was the first time. So, these conferences are slowly opening up to the local governments, to the business, to the NGOs, etc., to try to get everybody on board. It's not such an easy thing. And the recommendations coming from the internet were conveyed to the head of states for the first time. So at least something happened. And in the 52 pages, you had 10 decisions, more or less important, going beyond GDP, things like that, green economy, reporting from the companies. But you had also the Sustainable Development Goals, which probably could be the most important decision coming out of Rio, because it should be shaping the landscape of international cooperation in the next years. The SDGs coming with the MDGs is going to be an interesting discussion. How are we going to merge them? What's going to happen with both after 2015? And 2015 seems to be an important date, because it's also the date by which as Ambassador Dasgupta said, well, we should have a new climate protocol. I don't know if it's going to be a new regime completely. But what's interesting in governance systems and in United Nations is that in these international negotiations, the political groupments are exposing. If I can, they say small islands are talking for themselves. Africa is talking for itself. And for instance, I'm French. The emissions per capita of China are higher than the emission of capita of France. So the things are completely changing. The landscape is changing. And in the next 20 years, a treaty, a convention, has to deal with the past, but also with the future. What's going to happen in the next 20 years? So it has to find a way to cope with both. So the United Nations is not the place. The United Nations is going to make a decision if it has examples like Costa Rica. If we had countries showing it's possible, how is the low-carbon society? People are more happy in the low-carbon society. People are more healthy in the low-carbon society. If we have these examples, the United Nations will follow with a beautiful agreement. But if we don't have these examples, because it starts nationally, and the problem with the planet is that in each country you have national aspects of planetary problems. And you have to concentrate on those, because you cannot do everything, and you have to choose your priority. you have a very important geopolitical move for the governance of the planet, which is the G20. You were from G8 to G7 in the old times. Now there is a much more important gathering of countries. Is it going to be able to take decisions? Perhaps not yet, but it's very important. It has taken decisions, for instance, on volatility of agricultural goods, because it has identified where this volatility came from, bans on export. So the market did not know what was available, so people, the price, etc. And something new, the new also part of governance which is now merging is the governance on development. All the world of development, the banks of development here, Bindu, it's so nice to be with you here. But the World Bank also. All these structures for development are slowly taking into account sustainable development, and we are seeing a sort of a merging of teams. The teams of sustainability and the teams of reducing poverty are slowly and more importantly working together. This is what's happening, and this is very interesting because perhaps it's going to make a change in 2015, perhaps not. Some countries believe that the two teams are going to be different because reducing poverty, eradicating poverty is very different from ensuring sustainability. But more and more people are working together. And what is so important now, we've got other elements of the international governance. We've got a lot of sort of an international public opinion, which is given by NGOs, by think tanks, by Davos. Davos is playing an important role also, some very good reports. You have the Prince Charles, somebody talked about the Prince Charles, he's part of it. You have the IISD, I mean, more and more of these organizations are playing a very important role. And if a company is making a mistake, like Nike did one day, all the internet is going to stop it. I mean, so the public opinion, or the world public opinion, is slowly coming up and is very important, and it's giving a sort of a license to operate for all of you. So, I mean, if Rio Plus 20 had been a total failure, and if there was no agreement, that would have meant that sustainable development in the United Nations, we would not be talking about it for the next 10 years. At least what has happened in Rio Plus 20, in adverse conditions, because economic crisis, some countries were during elections, is that 193 countries agree that sustainable development is still the ideal to which they are heading for. This is very important politically. It means we all have to work, and we are right to work on it. Now, I don't want to discuss too much. I think, I'm not saying what I believe myself. I'm talking about the landscape of international governance right now. What is important now is that we have a process for these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and the MDGs. And in Rio Plus 20, you must understand something, is that the international community in Rio Plus 20 stays on the fact that reducing poverty remains the overarching priority. And exactly as you said, development is absolutely necessary. In Stockholm, you didn't have development without the environment. In Rio Plus 20, you don't have environment if you don't have development, to make it simple. So it's still the same two trends, but this is what happened. And in Rio Plus 20, it was said that even if we have some difficulties implementing this convention, something fantastic has happened in the last 20 years. A huge amount of people were lifted out of poverty in China, in India, in South Africa, etc. And this is very important. And for Brazilian negotiators, or some countries, they said, okay, we know how to do it. So in the next 20 years, it's possible that we're going to have a 7 billion middle class. And the question will be, how will this middle class live? That's the point of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.